You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button.
We've spent an awful lot of time talking about the defensive line with LSU this offseason, but even throughout last season, whether it was a transfer portal or, guys coming or going, recruiting, all those things, position of need, pass rush. Wanted to kind of continue that. Saw this earlier. Our guy Bryce Koon over at Go247's got himself a little series going where he's looking at LSU's pass rush and kind of going each guy individually. Thought we'd welcome him on the show and do some of that here and get a feel for what the Tigers unit might look like in 2024. Bryce joins us now. Bryce, how are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well. We're getting closer to football season, so I'm enjoying the final few free Saturdays, I guess we could say we have.
We are getting closer to football season. At this time in 2 weeks, or not even 2 weeks, so I guess we're a week and a half, SEC Media Days. We'll be almost wrapping up. We'll be on the third day. So, I mean, that we always use that kind of as our unofficial, official start to football season. So it's fast approaching. And LSU's defensive line has been a hot topic. Before we get into some of the guys individually, which we can absolutely do because there's plenty, I kind of just want an overarching thought on from you on LSU's pass rush from 2023 into 2024 and maybe where they need the biggest jump.
Yeah, I mean, and like you mentioned when you introduced me, I mean, in the middle of a series right now where we're taking a look at individual guys, but the overarching theme, like you mentioned, is this group just needs a dude. They need a guy that can go out there and get near the double-digit sack total. Now, look, I know that number, when you look across the country, has been kind of a hard number to reach for a majority of pass rushers. But LSU's a place that traditionally has had that type of guy. I mean, even if the numbers weren't there, a guy that was a force that the offensive line, the offensive coordinator, and the O-line coach had to say, we've got to shift to try to take this guy out of the play. I go back a couple of years ago, B.J. Ojolari was a guy. There was a guy that maybe the numbers didn't pop off like people thought they would, his last year or two, but he was a force, and you had to know where he was on the field. And then, obviously, Harold Perkins freshman year. So, you enter this season, and last year it looked like, hey, we've got a couple role players. Like, we've got a couple guys that can come in, they can give you snaps, they can get after the quarterback. The biggest jump to me is, are we going to see one guy emerge, or is this going to be a total team, group, room effort that can make the jump into saying, hey, we're now an elite pass rushing unit? I think that there's some pieces, there's potential for guys to pop off, maybe the younger guys more, or we're going to see developments from the veteran guys. But I'd like to see maybe one guy just say, hey, I'm going to take the onus on me. Maybe it's Harold Perkins in this new Blake Baker scheme, or maybe it's somebody else. But being able to have a guy that every single time that quarterback, steps under center or is in the shotgun, he has to check and know where that guy is on the field. That's something LSU really didn't have at times last year because of Perkins was all over the place, and there just wasn't enough consistency from anybody else to really pose that consistent threat.
Can it be Harold Perkins? I mean, I feel like that's the obvious follow-up there. Can it be Perkins even with this new scheme and new position again?
I mean, look, I think that's something that Perkins is having a conversation with Blake Baker and even Kevin Peoples to an extent of like, look, this is your money-making year. We know what you can be. We know the potential. But if you're really going to be that day one pick that a lot of people 2 years ago penciled him into being, you have to produce at that elite level. You look at some of the pass rushers that have come out in the most recent years, they've been able to do just that. Now, Perkins is different, like you mentioned, in the sense that his position is going to be something that they're going to constantly tinker with. But I think Blake Baker's attacking style is going to allow him to play a role in this pass rush. May not look traditionally like what we've been seeing in the past, but to answer your question, Perkins can definitely be that. And I think that if Blake Baker is smart and if this defense, for lack of better words, falters at certain times, what we saw happen last year, it felt like they were trying to continue to fit a square peg into a round hole. I don't think that's going to happen this year because, one, the pressure that's on this defensive staff to get it right, and just Blake Baker's understanding and difference in philosophy from the previous regime.
All right, let's move away from Harold, because I mean that, like I said, like that is the obvious choice, right? I mean, even when you were talking about guys in the past, like Harold Perkins' freshman season, so it's the obvious choice. Let's talk about a few of the other guys, some that you have profiled already, and some that I'm sure that you will. I kind of want to start with one that I know you're going to get to, and that's Braden Swinson, because he's one of the more fascinating players on this defense to me, Bryce, in the sense that, look, they brought in, Ovie Gofu out of the portal to be that edge rushing guy, and they missed. And ultimately, it ended up being Braden Swinson. Like, he was one of, if not your best and most productive pass rushers in 2023. What kind of leap do you expect from him going into 2024?
Well, Matt, you must have a look at my computer right now, because Braden Swinson's the guy I'm writing up right now and going back in the film, and we'll have that tomorrow on July 4th for readers. But, as I've kind of dove into what Braden Swinson's game looked last year, look, you hit the nail on the head. Ovie Gofu felt like the big physical guy they were going to bring in. And Swinson, to me, when you watch him, his bend and athleticism to get around tackles is massive. One of the plays I'm going to highlight was a massive kind of strip sack that he had at Missouri. It was 3rd and 6. They were trying to drive down the field. 3-point lead for LSU. It knocks them 4th and half a mile, and LSU obviously gets the pick and wins the game. But his speed around the edge and his use of his hands were something that I think he came in a little raw. He was good at his previous stop, but this is a guy, too, who I think is a veteran player who could really benefit from the coaching of Kevin Peoples, Bo Davis, and Blake Baker in terms of where we're going to put you, how we can line you up on either side. That's one of the big story, lines coming out of spring ball is that, they told us, and Swinson told us, and I believe Parrish Shan said as well, we're all defensive ends. There's no, you're going to play specifically on this side or that side. We're all going to play defensive end and be interchangeable pieces. So being able to play to Swinson's strength is going to be something massive. And like I said, his length, his bend, just certain things that he brings to the table, I think that's what they saw on tape last year when they brought him in. And you saw it in flashes and glimpses, but if he takes that step, I know we were talking, Matt, about who could be that guy. Swinson's got all the ability. I mean, he's got the height, the weight, the bend, the athleticism, the speed, the handwork. I mean, if it's just more consistent, he's a guy who could really pop off this season.
That was going to be my next question was, can he be the guy? Like we've talked about, can he be that Ojulari or whatnot that you have to scheme for? And there you go. I mean, you answered it right there. He's fascinating just because I don't know if it's because he felt like he kind of came out of nowhere just because all the focus was on a Gofu if he could be the guy, and then Swinson ended up being that. But he fascinates me going into 2024. Talking with Bryce Koon, Go247, focusing in on the LSU pass rush. He's on Twitter at Bryce_Koon. Let's talk about a few of the guys that you have highlighted already. Let's start with Savon Jones, another veteran guy who really you saw kind of relegated to that big defensive end role. What jump do you expect to see from him here in 24?
Yeah, I mean, look, Shand is a guy that has kind of transformed his body over the past couple of seasons. He's the big body. To me, the biggest thing for him is we don't need to see 7, 8, 9, 10 sacks out of Parrish Shan. That would be a cherry on top. What I need to see is his ability to set the edge, whether that is a mobile quarterback that you got and that LSU got tore up a couple times against, or it's just straight up the run game. I mean, look, for everyone who wants to talk about the pass rush, the run game's also massively something that this defense has to be better at. They've got to be better at the point of attack. So a lot of times they lost outside contain, and with Shan's size, he's about as big as you're going to see out there on the edge. There's been a lot of talk with, well, would they move him to the inside? He has kind of maintained, especially during spring ball, that he's a guy that he feels more comfortable on the outside. Maybe he could slot in and play a little 3-tech, but his ability to set the edge and help some of the faster, quicker guys, like a Harold Perkins, like a Braden Swinson, and a couple other ones, his ability to do that is going to lead to some assisted sacks and lead to stuff that's not going to show up in the box score necessarily, Max. And Matt, and I think that's the biggest thing going forward. It might not be gaudy stats, but when you look at the film, it's consistent snaps. You can throw him out there. You know what he's going to give you. And just as a veteran guy, getting that last little bit of potential out. I think he's a guy that has been a solid contributor, but can Kevin Peoples, work some magic here and elevate him from solid rotational player to consistent contributor that makes big plays, whether it shows up on the stat sheet or not.
Are he and Savon Jones kind of the same guy in that regard?
I do think so. I don't think that LSU is necessarily going to get to the end of the season and see double-digit sack totals from either. What I do think that you can see is consistent play. If you're into PFF grades, quality PFF grades, and just kind of, LSU's had guys like this. You look across the SEC, guys like this, just consistent role players that allow for the stars to flourish. Because if Harold Perkins is going to be Harold Perkins, if Swinson can be what we think Swinson can be, and just other pieces that I'm sure we'll talk about, these kind of role guys have to do their job at a really high level so that we don't talk about them as much. It's almost the honest of, hey, we don't want to hear our name mentioned because we're just so consistent in what we do. So I feel like they're kind of in the same boat. But like I said, too, if these guys were to pop off and have a spectacular, final season, that's just kind of a cherry on top for what I think Peoples, Baker, and, Bo Davis want to see.
All right, one guy that I'm actually kind of surprised that it maybe took this long for us to get to, because he came in as a 5-star, obviously, last year, and they raved about him in the spring, and that's Deshaun Whack, who feels like he's probably just flying under the radar. When we talk about Swinson or Perkins as somebody who could be that guy, it feels like Deshaun Whack is probably the other obvious answer as somebody who could be that guy, yes?
Yes, I mean, when you talk about upside and the ability to mold this guy from raw, absolute athlete to polished pass rusher, this is what you talk about from year one to year two jump. Deshaun Whack is a guy that has all the tools. You talk about length, you talk about bend. I mean, he showed it at times. And I'll say this too, he also showed it in moments that were key and critical downs. And so if he's already showing it in that, let's say in that session, in that opportunity, the coaching staff's looking saying, if we could just get this consistently, if he's showing it on a big 3rd and 12, what about a 2nd and 8? What about a 1st and 10? And getting that consistently so that he's not just in that 3rd down pass rusher role. Which look, there's guys that make a lot of money, man. Being that 3rd down pass rusher at the next level. But I think Womack's ceiling is probably below Harold Perkins in terms, but right up there, maybe a little higher than what Swinson can do. And he's one of the guys, too. Look, we're just being honest. If it's not a season that turns out the way he wants to be, don't want to speculate too much here, but he's a guy who could potentially look elsewhere afterwards if it's not working out. Because 2 years, if you really haven't, played pivotal minutes, snaps, or whatever you want to call it, it's kind of time to move on, maybe fresh change of scenery. So I like Deshaun Whack. I think he's going to have a good season. And like the bottom line, the kid's toolsy. Like I texted an NFL scout the other day and said, hey, what do you think here? And he said, all the tools, it's just in between the ears. Can he consistently have a high motor constantly every single down? He has NFL obvious potential.
One more for you, Bryce. We'll get you out of here on it, and we appreciate your time. The defensive tackle spot, and we've spent a lot of time on edge rusher and even Perkins at linebacker here in this segment, but the defensive tackle has been really the focal point of the defensive line conversation. They feel great about Jacoby and Guillory. Obviously, they had Gio Paez and Suggs out of the transfer portal. What is your feeling on the state of LSU's defensive tackle position as they get set to open fall camp in about a month?
Yeah, I mean, I'm nervous, man. I think a lot of people are nervous about what this is going to look like, and you hit the nail on the head. Jacoby and Guillory is going to be, we'll say, DT1. When you look at DT2, 3, and 4, there's names, there's bodies, but where exactly are these guys going to fit in the equation and who separates themselves? So, look, you mentioned a guy like Gio Paez has played outside for the majority of his career, and I know you guys interviewed him when he first committed and everything. I like him as a high floor type of player. He's going to give you quality snaps. He's going to be able to consistently, get his nose in there, disrupt some plays. But, you kind of start to look at the NFL, and there's been, more of a transition to interior pressure. And that's something I'm going to touch on when we look at some of these defensive tackles, as those guys make a premium, too, at the next level. And so does LSU have that guy on the roster? I don't know. And if it starts to falter or starts to really look like the weak link that a lot of, people are saying it could be, that's going to put a ton of pressure on the shoulders of Jacoby and Guillory. And that could affect some type of output that he has because teams are saying, hey, this other guy, we can just one-on-one, or we can combo block of the linebacker and take out a Harold Perkins, a Whit Weeks, a Greg Penn, something like that. So Gio Pies is obviously there. Suggs is the guy that I think comes in with a chip on his shoulder, felt he was under-recruited, undervalued, balled out his level, and all respect to him. But this is a different ball game. This is a whole different level that you're about to encounter. So if you can make some type of jump and transition during fall camp, show some flashes, that's really exciting. And then I'll just throw a couple of other games out there, which we'll see. Dominic McKinley is a guy that I was able to see during kind of the summer circuit of camps. He was out there, his younger brother. Dominic has put on real good weight. We talk about freshmen transforming their body. He looks different. He looks more like a guy that is ready to contribute. Another one, Ahmad Bro out of Ruston. I think that's a guy who kind of went under the radar in this past recruiting class, but another guy that I think eventually is going to be a consistent contributor for this program, and he's bulked up too. So, look, if you're a freshman, just because they brought in a couple of transfers and there's guys like Jalen Lee that have kind of yet to realize their potential, there's snaps to be had alongside Jacoby and Guillory. And you know as well as I do, Matt, Jacoby and Guillory can't play all 60, 70 defensive snaps. So It's going to have to be, some sort of rotation that works. And just to round it out, I'm nervous. I'm excited, though, to watch what these guys look like and the intensity that Bo Davis coaches, them with, because that's something that I think fans have had a little bit of an inside look when they watch some of the practice highlights, but it's a whole different world when you're in that indoor center and he's barking out commands.
It's been certainly interesting. There was so many question marks to be answered on defense after overhauling the staff. All the focus really has settled in on the defensive line. So, Bryce, we appreciate you stopping by today, spending a few minutes with us and breaking it down. Thank you. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, Matt, appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.